She was a single mom who found happiness with a new man.
It seemed like it would be a perfect match.
He always talked with good intentions.
Say the relationship was great. They was doing good.
Until an unimaginable crime tears them apart.
It just shocked me.
It was a double murder.
Just a day I wish would have never happened.
That struck fear in the entire town.
Rumors swirl about who's responsible.
The community knew something bad was going to happen.
Basically, everybody knew each other.
I don't think there were any secrets.
Yeah, Mitch, he do it.
He said he was going to do his execution style. I said, you did walking that crazy child.
That's when he came in and he admitted the truth.
But will justice ever be served?
Her family had to go through this over and over.
This was a death penalty case.
It's just gruesome.
There's no reason for this to occur like it did.
It was like, oh, wow. It's heartbreaking.
September 11th, 1995. It's a sleepy Monday morning in Vidette, Georgia, a rural crossroads between Savannah and Atlanta.
It was just a little small community.
It probably didn't have a population of over 200.
There was a flashing light in the main intersection and a convenience store, but mostly it's agricultural.
This morning, the sun still hangs low over the horizon when Jasmine Jenkins pulls up outside the home of her sister, Brenda Palmer.
It was their practice that her sister would come pick her up in the morning and they would go over into Jefferson County where they worked at a sewing plant.
But today, when Jasmine arrives, Brenda isn't waiting outside.
Come on, Brenda!
She blew the horn, no one answered.
Thinking her sister had overslept, Jasmine goes to the door.
We're going to be late.
The front door is slightly open. And she starts to get like this funny feeling that something is not right.
Brenda?
She's at the door, no one answered. So she went in there.
She sees Brenda's teenage daughter, Christine, who normally sleeps in the front room.
Only she wasn't asleep.
She was laying in the bed with a bullet hole in her head.
In a panic, Jasmine runs back to Brenda's bedroom.
She looked inside the other room and she seen my sister stretched out.
She had 2 bullet wounds to the head.
31-year-old Brenda Jenkins Palmer had always been a small-town girl.
We grew up in the country part of Vidette. Everybody got along. I mean, it was just a little great town.
Though life wasn't always easy for Brenda growing up, she was always surrounded by love.
Her father passed, then my father passed. So the 2 families, my mom and her mother, sisters, we kind of grew up together like sisters and brothers.
As the oldest of her siblings, Brenda learned to pull her weight at a young age.
She helped take care of her other siblings. When we was younger, she got a job. She did all that, running around and paid the bills for the family, helping out as much as she could.
And she always set a good example.
She was a church-going person. She wasn't the type of person that caused trouble. She always been there to help somebody. She was just a great all-around person.
She was also an outstanding mother.
She had a child at a young age.
The father was never in Christine's life, so brother played both roles in raising her daughter.
Under her mother's loving care, Christine thrived.
They spent a lot of time together. Brenda kept Christine in the church.
Christine was a good student. She was on the honor roll and in the marching band. She was apparently a very happy person.
And Brenda was happy too. But there was one thing missing.
Brenda was looking for love.
And then she found it with an older man named Willie Palmer.
Willie, he had like a little club that he served food and stuff.
What can I get you?
I don't know. I've never been here before.
Well, I'm the owner. Ask me anything.
This is your place?
Absolutely.
He was from a well-known family in that area.
You grew up around here?
Yeah, just down the road where I grew up.
I can't believe we've never met.
I know, right? You're gorgeous, by the way.
They hit it off. It was like almost love at first sight.
As the couple grew closer, they formed a beautiful blended family.
He seemed to accept Brenda's daughter, Christine, and Brenda accepted his 3 children from a previous marriage.
Brenda also grew close to Willie's teenage nephew, Frederico.
Hey, Brenda, can you pick me up after practice today?
Sure, hon.
All right. Hey, I'll see y'all.
She actually loved Freddie. She did a lot of good things for him.
Before long, Brenda and Willie married and bought some property out in the country.
It was 5 or 6 acres all together.
It's a nice piece of land.
And a new home wasn't all the couple had to celebrate.
The baby came along. They was doing good. He was good to Brenda.
But now Brenda's sister has just walked into a horrific scene.
Brenda's daughter was shot in the face in her bed, and then Brenda was shot in the head.
Oh, thank God.
Miraculously, Brenda's infant daughter was unharmed.
She was just lying on the bed, not obviously realizing what had happened.
Then, trying to collect herself, Jasmine picks up the phone to call 911.
This is 1995, so all she had was a landline.
What the?
But when she picks it up, there's no dial tone.
What? The phone line is dead.
In 1995, after raising her daughter Christine as a single mom, 31-year-old Brenda Jenkins Palmer had found happiness again with her new husband, 42-year-old Willie Palmer.
Willie and Brenda also had a 1-year-old daughter of their own.
It was a great blended family.
But now, Brenda's sister has walked into a horrifying scene inside her sister's home.
Brenda was lying on the floor. She had 2 bullet wounds to the head. Christine, she had been shot in the face.
However, Brenda and Willie's baby girl was unharmed.
That child was on the bed with the daughter, Christine.
With the home phone dead, Brenda's sister takes the baby and races out the door.
This is 1995 in rural Georgia, so few people had cell phones.
She ran back out the door and ran to the local convenience store, and she told him to dial 911.
But when first responders reach the tiny rural crossroads where Brenda lives, there's no saving her or her daughter.
They're both pronounced dead at the scene.
Get her out of here. Yes. Ma'am, why don't you come with me?
And while Brenda's little girl appears unharmed, first responders tending to her in the ambulance decide to transport her to the hospital, just to be sure.
They also allowed Brenda's sister to accompany the child.
She was crying. She couldn't talk.
Please, GBI.
Given the magnitude of the case, Burke County Police call in the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
The GBI took over in the investigation because it was a double murder and a little bit more complex.
It takes time for agents to reach the remote location, deep in the Georgia countryside.
I couldn't see the house from the road because of a twisty driveway that led from the highway to the house.
When we arrived, we kind of did a walk through the scene.
The first thing the investigators notice is the broken lock on the front door.
The door was kicked in.
And inside the door was the first victim, Brenda's daughter, Christine.
Right there in that front room, it was a little twin-sized bed.
She was partially sitting up in the bed, and I could see a wound on her face. There was blood on the bed and a little bit of blood spatter on the other side.
In the line of business, some are worse than others, and this was one of the worst ones, especially when you see a 15-year-old kid shot in the face.
Examining her, I noted on top of a sheet that was covering her leg a cartridge casing.
The investigators bagged the shell casing as evidence before heading into the next room.
And there was Brenda lying on the floor.
There was some sheets that her feet had gotten tangled into.
She was obviously pulled out of bed.
No!
There was blood coming from her head.
She had 2 bullet wounds.
Nearby, the investigators find 2 more cartridge casings that are a match for the one they found in Christine's bed.
They were 22 long rifle casings.
Then, after finding the phone line dead, the investigators head outside to check the wiring.
There was a telephone interface box attached to the house. This interface box would be where the wire comes from the telephone company, and you would run wires into the house for the telephone service.
But in this case, the box had been opened and the wires disconnected.
Suspecting the killer had disconnected the phone before heading inside, the investigators removed the interface box from the house.
We took the telephone interface box to be processed for a fingerprint.
That may eventually give investigators the suspect's identity. But the motive behind the murders remains a mystery.
You don't know if it's a robbery gone bad or whatever.
And it's not like there are any potential witnesses nearby.
She lived in an isolated area down this 2-lane dirt logging road.
However, the investigators do have someone to turn to.
Hey, you need to let me out, huh?
Brenda's family has begun to gather outside the crime scene tape.
I got a call from my cousin. Something really bad happened down here in Vidette.
What's going on?
Unfortunately, Brenda and Christine were murdered.
It just shocked me. I didn't know what to think or what to do. I mean, it's just like everybody almost lost it.
Everybody was getting all upset and talking crazy and everything, man. It was a bad day for the whole family.
But as Brenda's brother speaks with the investigators, his shock quickly turns to suspicion.
Who do you think might have done this?
Her husband, Willie Palmer.
He was the first one came to my mind.
The relationship between the two was very volatile.
She had filed for divorce.
The family of Brenda Jenkins Palmer has just told Georgia Bureau of Investigation agents that they believe her husband, Willie Palmer, was behind the shooting that killed her and her daughter, Christine.
I was just about 95% sure what had happened was because of him.
Willie was the most obvious because of the problems they were having.
According to the family, Brenda had recently filed for divorce.
They say that things between Willie and Brenda had started off well.
When they first started, their relationship was great. From what I saw, they was doing good and everything.
They were living up in Goff, which is a different community than Vidette.
But not long after the baby was born, Brenda and the girls moved out.
She didn't give me an explanation. She never would go into details on nothing.
She never told me why.
Was she abusive?
She didn't mention no abuse to us.
However, Brenda's actions suggest the answer may be yes.
Brenda had to get a restraining order against him.
And when Willie violated it, she had him arrested.
He was sent to county jail.
And while he was in jail, Brenda looked for a new place for her and her daughters to live.
She tried to make sure that he would not be able to find her.
In a big city, that might mean a women's shelter, but not deep in rural Georgia.
She had to just find a small house somewhere out in the middle of nowhere.
And she found it at the end of a dirt road on the outskirts of Vidette.
The residence was basically a two-room shack.
It's a sad thing to know that somebody had to live in it, and even sadder that somebody died in it.
It was only supposed to be temporary.
From what she told me, she had money saved up and she was working on getting her a better place.
But she'd barely settled in when her cousin learned that Willie was out of jail.
I walked in the house and I said, "Brother," I said, "I just seen him." She said, "That can't be. Ain't no way." I said, "I just seen him at the phone booth." And she sat there for a minute and I said, "I just want to let you know he out." And she acted like it wasn't really nothing serious about it.
When was that?
Couple days ago.
That actually was my last conversation with her. I don't know if she was frightened or concerned or what, but I know 2 days later, all this happened.
And now that Brenda and her daughter are dead, the family is convinced that Willie had something to do with it.
So you think that he came out here to the house and killed her?
It had to be him.
He was trying to find her, but he didn't know where she was at. How he found out about it, I don't know.
Had Willie shot and killed his estranged wife and stepdaughter?
The pending divorce did give him a possible motive.
And that's not the only thing that suggests he might be responsible.
That Brenda Palmer and Christine were shot and killed, but the baby was not, indicated that there was a reason for the baby not to be killed.
The investigators suspected the reason is a simple one.
And that was a love of the child.
Willie may have hesitated to hurt his own flesh and blood.
We'll be in touch. Thank you.
We'll be in touch.
With Willie now a person of interest, the investigators bring him in for questioning.
Obviously, you want to either put him in the homicide or eliminate him.
Although when the interview begins, Willie seems surprised by the news that his stepdaughter and Brenda are dead.
What about the baby?
She's fine.
Thank God.
Willie admits that he and Brenda had problems, but he claims to have moved on from the relationship.
When Brenda and Willie's relationship was ending, he reached back out to his previous wife, Suzanne, and convinced her that they should give it another try. And she let him move back in.
And he said that once Brenda had put him in jail for violating the restraining order, he'd realized that there was no going back.
Okay, so have you seen her since you got out of jail?
Yeah, a couple days ago I went over to a new spot just to get the rest of my stuff.
So you were out there on Sunday night?
Willie denied any involvement in the death of Christine and Brenda.
So where were you that night?
I was with my nephew, Federico.
He said they were in Augusta, away from the area.
I was with him all day.
All right, that's all for now. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
And when the GBI agents contact Federico, he confirms his uncle's story.
He said they drove to Augusta.
But did that mean it was true, or was Willie's nephew just covering for him?
Frederico was a lot younger. He was a late teenager.
I believe Frederico was actually really scared of Willie Palmer.
With doubts about Willie's alibi, the investigators head back to the tiny crossroads of Vidette.
There's just one store in Vidette, just a little country store, and nothing else.
What's going on?
Good afternoon, sir.
But that one country store had just what the investigators need.
Yeah, I was here at the store when she came in to call the police.
Yeah?
I knew Willie was up to something when he passed by the night before.
The witness put Willie in the area that night.
He saw Willie's car pass by on the night of the murder.
I knew Willie was up to something.
Georgia Bureau of Investigation agents believe they may be one step closer to solving the murders of Brenda Jenkins Palmer and her teenage daughter, Christine.
A clerk at the county store near Brenda's house says he saw Willie's car pass by on the night of the murder.
He's an important witness that put Willie in the area.
Are you sure it was Willie?
Oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Willie.
This was a little small community. Basically, everybody knew each other.
We all attend same churches, the same schools, work in the same places, shop in the same areas.
And the clerk isn't the only one who is pretty sure Willie had committed the murders.
Willie Palmer was a very dangerous man to be around. And that's not from me, that's coming from the people in that area.
However, Willie's reputation around the county wasn't the only reason people thought he was behind the murders.
A lot of people was coming to me and telling me, said, well, he said he was gonna kill her.
Thanks so much for your time.
No
Appreciate
problem.
it.
No problem.
Homicide?
And it wasn't long before those stories started making their way back to the GBI agents investigating the murders.
Willie Palmer said that he was going to kill Brenda Jenkins, and he said, y'all watch me. He said, I mean what I say.
Homicide.
Willie Palmer had been going all over Burke County basically saying he was going to kill Brenda.
He said, I'm going to do it execution style. And you'll see.
And that's exactly what happened.
He was referring to Brenda Jenkins. Yeah.
It was becoming clear that he was responsible for their murders.
And the picture becomes even clearer when a woman named Tammy Howell contacts the investigators and says she has information about the murders.
Homicide.
Tammy worked at a loan company and Brenda was a customer.
About a month ago, Brenda came in. She was nervous acting because she was scared of Willie Palmer. So she had just put him in jail.
She begged her not to tell Willie where she moved to because she did not want him to find her.
She said that she was scared if he got out of jail, he was going to kill her.
Tammy says that Willie had come in a few weeks later.
He said he had just gotten out of jail.
Willie was at the loan company trying to borrow money for an attorney for dealing with the restraining order that Brenda had taken against him.
And according to Tammy, he was obviously upset about it.
He said something like, the last thing he does is to kill that.
Tammy said that she and her coworkers didn't take Willie too seriously at the time.
He was always a polite person, and that's why we didn't really think anything else because we just thought it was like anger. You know, get angry, you just gonna say something.
They didn't really think he would do it.
Still, she had done as Brenda asked.
The lady at the loan company would not tell Willie Palmer where Brenda was living.
But had Willie somehow found out and followed through on his threats?
A lot of people did know where Brenda lived during that time, and it would almost be virtually impossible to keep someone from finding that out.
Have a seat right over here, please.
Their suspicion of Willie deepening The investigators ask his ex-wife Suzanne to come to the station to see if she has any information.
My sister Brenda and Suzanne, they knew each other pretty good.
Willie had also told them he reconnected with Suzanne after he split up with Brenda.
So how long were you and Willie married?
10 years.
What happened?
His temper mostly.
Before he married Brenda, there was a history of problems with his first wife.
Suzanne also confirms that after Brenda left Willie, she had decided to give him another chance.
Things were going okay between Suzanne and Willie for a while, but it wasn't long before she remembered why they broke up in the first place.
His temper came back.
Oh yeah, it sure did.
Willie became so irate and he started making all these threats.
I gotta be honest with you. I was relieved when Brenda put him back in jail.
She was actually also very scared of Willie.
And according to Suzanne, she had good reason to be.
He had recently tried to kill her.
I was relieved when Brenda put him back in jail.
Georgia Bureau of Investigation agents have just learned that their lead suspect, Willie Palmer, had tried to kill his ex-wife Suzanne, too.
When did this happen?
The night before Brenda was killed.
Suzanne was in the car with her sister and Willie rammed into the back of them, trying to run them off the road.
Then he chased us for over a mile till I drove up to that fire hall.
She was petrified.
It was becoming clear that if anybody was going to be responsible for killing Brenda, it was Willie.
All right, thank you for coming. I'll walk you out.
Hoping to prove it, the investigators decide it's time to lean on Willie's nephew, Frederico Palmer.
We want to talk about the night of Sunday, September 10th.
Frederico was Willie's alibi for the night of the murder.
But he was also the murder plot's weakest link.
I confronted Frederico, telling him, "Frederico, you were there, weren't you?" And he goes, "Yep."
He told me to come ride somewhere with him.
Frederico says Willie had initially told him that they were going to Augusta, which is the same story given to the investigators.
But rather than going to that nightclub, they went toward Vidette.
And he said, "Give me, should he do it?" I said, "No." What do you do, boy? Shoot Brenda.
Frederico says he tried to talk his uncle out of it, but it was no use.
Willie has his mind made up.
He said, "I got to do it." But she trying to take everything he got. Did he mention Christine? Not till we got down there.
According to Frederico, once they drove down the dirt road that led to Brenda's house, Willie stopped the car and then pulled a rifle out from the back seat.
What kind of gun is it? I can't give you. 22, right? Yeah.
A 22 is a match for the shell casings recovered at the crime scene.
Then, after taking the gun, Willie told his nephew to drive.
He told me to go park the car, walk back down there.
Back to the house?
Yeah, I need your help with something.
Okay.
He felt like he didn't have a choice.
It was either you help me or else I will get you.
Frederico says when he walked back down to the house, his uncle was fumbling around with a telephone box outside.
Man, the damn thing won't. Yeah, you try.
So, let me ask you this. Who opened the box up? I opened it. And what'd you do when you got it open? Pull the plug in, pull it up.
He asked Frederico to undo the phone line, which he obliged.
Frederico says that by the time he finished disconnecting the phone line, Willie was already pounding on Brenda's front door.
Brenda, wake up!
They keep the door in. Then he went in. And I heard a shot.
Willie basically raised the rifle and just shot her straight between the eyes.
Then, leaving Christine dead in the front room, Willie proceeded into Brenda's room.
My sister woke up and she grabbed the baby.
She grabbed the baby because she knew that he would never harm the baby.
He was in there talking to her, like, give me the baby. And she wouldn't give it to him. So he told me to get the baby from him.
Give me the baby! Give me the baby! Fred, get in here! Get the baby.
His nephew pulled her out of my sister's arm.
Look at me.
Last night, the baby and Brenda fell on the floor.
Frederico said he then took the baby out of the residence.
And once he was on the porch, he heard shots.
How many shots do you hear?
2 or 3.
Then, according to Frederico, Willie came out onto the porch and told him to take the baby back inside.
He said, pull it down this side of me.
So y'all left the baby laying there, tried to run, it didn't shot.
Yeah, he pulled it. Yeah.
Frederico says they then went back to Willie's home, changed clothes, and disposed of the evidence.
Frederico told me Willie ended up throwing the clothing that he wore and the .22 rifle in a creek that was located on Highway 305 in Burke County.
It's a compelling story. But is it the truth?
Frederico said they left the baby with Brenda, but that's not where Brenda's sister found her.
That morning, she came in and found Christine on the bed with the baby.
It's conceivable that the baby had crawled into the bed with her half-sister at some point during the night.
So, to verify the rest of his story, GBI agents head to the creek where Frederico claimed Willie disposed of the evidence.
We ended up getting a guy from Burke County Emergency Management Association to come out to the scene where he claimed Willie Palmer threw clothing, shoes, and a rifle. And it wasn't long, he found the rifle.
The investigators sent the rifle, a .22, to the state crime lab.
They test-fired the .22 rifle that we recovered out of the creek, compared it to casings inside the residence, and it was a match.
It's more than enough for the investigators to charge Willie with Brenda and Christine's murders.
They understood our pain, and, they wanted justice for my sister just like I did.
This was a death penalty case.
And everything about the case pointed towards Willie.
Georgia Bureau of Investigation agents have arrested 42-year-old Willie Palmer for the murder of his estranged wife Brenda Jenkins Palmer and her teenage daughter.
The prosecutors have announced that they intend to pursue the death penalty.
Despite the seriousness of the charges, Willie refuses to talk.
That's the coldest man I have ever been involved with trying to talk to in my career.
But will his silence matter?
The prosecutors also charged Willie's nephew, Frederico Palmer, for his role in the murders.
The district attorney felt like Frederico was as guilty as Willie, and I do too. His own actions that he admitted put him right in the middle of it, and everything he said fit. There was nothing that he told me that I could disprove.
And now the prosecutors need Frederico to tell his story to a jury.
To have an eyewitness co-conspirator testimony, you don't get that a lot. And so his testimony was extremely important.
They offered Frederico life without parole rather than a death sentence if he would testify.
He agreed to plead guilty and testify against his uncle.
When Willie goes on trial in April of 1997, the prosecutors portray him as a man with a vendetta.
It was because of anger or wrath, a need for revenge.
Brenda got him locked up after he violated his restraining order, and she was also fighting him in court.
When they divorced, she wanted his property.
Willie's mind was made up.
We don't know exactly how he found out where she lived, but a lot of people did know. And I think that's how word got back to Willie.
Then, on the night of September 10th, Willie and his nephew Frederico snuck up Brenda's long, remote drive.
Frederico undid the phone line.
Willie kicked the door in, shot Christine in the head.
He then went in Brenda's room, and Brenda had the baby in her arms.
Fred, get in here!
So Willie told Frederico, get the baby from her.
No!
Frederico got the baby, and then Willie shot Brenda twice.
Basically, she was executed.
It's just, gruesome.
But despite strong evidence and his nephew testifying against him, the prosecutors are still unable to convict Willie.
The first trial was a mistrial.
The defense claimed the DA's office did not provide one of the statements I took from Frederico, which in fact they did have it, because I found it in their discovery notes, which is what is given to the defense. So that means they had it, but they claimed they didn't, and the judge called it mistrial.
2 more trials followed, but the prosecutors could never make a conviction stick.
It seemed like there were a number of issues. I think the main reason was being tried in Burke County, where everybody knew each other. They just couldn't find a jury that could agree.
A juror's insight is so different from my insight or a defense attorney's insight. And this was a death penalty case. It was a big decision.
Then the next trial, there was the issue of Mr. Palmer's intellectual disability or whether he had one.
Since he was never acquitted, Willie remains in prison the entire time.
He was not going to get bond. They send him back to Burke County Jail, where he remains until he's tried again.
But the family and the prosecution are determined to get justice for Brenda and Christine.
I knew what the right verdict was. I knew we had the right guy.
And in 2023, almost 30 years after the murders, Willie stands trial for a 4th time.
When we retried him again, the death penalty was taken off the table.
And this time, the prosecution finally gets a conviction that sticks.
They find him guilty on all counts.
Willie got life without parole.
After such a long, long wait, it's a satisfying outcome.
He won't never get out of prison.
He won't do this to nobody else.
But while justice has been served, the murders of Brenda and her 15-year-old daughter, Christine, remain a senseless tragedy.
These 2 individuals did not deserve to have their life end.
Brenda was always doing everything she can to make life better for everybody that she could.
Christine never harmed anyone in her life.
She would have been, 45 or so now, having a family of her own.
There's no reason for this to occur like it did. None.
In the quiet town of Windsor, Connecticut, there once stood a place that promised something every aging person hopes to find in the final chapter of life: comfort, dignity, and peace. It was known as the Archer Home for elderly people and chronic invalids. a private nursing home where elderly men and women could spend their remaining years surrounded by care instead of loneliness. The house appeared welcoming, its reputation built upon kindness, compassion, and the reassuring presence of the woman who managed it. To many residents and neighbors, she was known simply as Sister Amy. She spoke softly, presented herself as deeply religious, and devoted her days to looking after people who could no longer care for themselves. Families believed they had found someone they could trust. Elderly widows and widowers believed they had finally found a place where they would not have to face old age alone. Yet behind that image of compassion lay one of the most disturbing criminal cases in early 20th century America. Over the course of several years, an extraordinary number of residents died under Amy Archer Gilligan's care. Most deaths appeared ordinary. After all, the residents were elderly, many suffered from chronic illnesses, and medicine at the time lacked many of the diagnostic tools that exist today. Death was expected in places like Archer Home, but eventually, a pattern emerged that was too unsettling to ignore. Healthy residents became violently ill without warning. Men and women who had appeared cheerful only days before suddenly developed severe stomach pain, uncontrollable vomiting, and debilitating diarrhea. Within a remarkably short time, many of them were dead. Even more troubling was another recurring detail. Time after time, Amy Archer Gilligan benefited financially from the deaths of those entrusted to her care. Wills had been rewritten, insurance policies named her as beneficiary. Property changed hands. Savings disappeared into her accounts. Years later, investigators would ask a question that forever changed the history of the quiet nursing home. Were these merely tragic coincidences, or had the sanctuary become the setting for calculated murder? This is the story of Amy Elizabeth Archer Gilligan, a woman whose name would become permanently associated with one of America's most infamous poisoning cases. It is also the story of vulnerable people whose final years were meant to be protected, but who instead became part of a mystery that still raises questions more than a century later. Before examining the investigation, the exhumations, and the courtroom battles that eventually followed, it is important to understand the woman at the center of the case and the world in which she lived. Amy Elizabeth Duggan was born around 1868 or 1869 in Connecticut to an Irish immigrant family. America, during the late 19th century, was changing rapidly. Industrialization was transforming cities, immigration was reshaping communities, and many working families struggled to establish stable lives in an increasingly competitive society. Irish immigrants, including Amy's family, often faced prejudice while attempting to build better futures for themselves and their children. Although relatively little is known about Amy's childhood, those who later knew her consistently described her as an intelligent and capable woman. She possessed strong interpersonal skills and was regarded as someone who could earn the confidence of others with surprising ease. She also demonstrated a practical understanding of money and business, qualities that would eventually allow her to manage her own institution. None of these characteristics were unusual on their own. In fact, they likely contributed to the respectable public image she cultivated throughout adulthood. Sometime during the closing years of the 19th century, Amy married James Archer. Their marriage marked the beginning of an ambitious plan that reflected a growing need within American society. As medical advances slowly increased life expectancy, more elderly individuals found themselves living beyond the years when they could independently care for themselves. Families often lacked the resources or space to provide full-time support for aging relatives. Private nursing homes began appearing across parts of New England to meet this demand, offering accommodation and assistance to elderly residents willing to pay for long-term care. Amy and James believed they could successfully operate such an establishment. Around 1907, they opened the Archer Home for elderly people and chronic invalids in Windsor, Connecticut. The facility was designed to accommodate older adults as well as individuals suffering from long-term illnesses. On the surface, The business appeared both compassionate and practical. Residents could either pay weekly fees or provide a larger payment in exchange for care during the remainder of their lives. For many elderly individuals who had no close relatives, this arrangement seemed reassuring. Instead of worrying about where they would live or who would care for them during declining health, they could settle into what appeared to be a peaceful home managed by a caring couple. Archer Home gradually developed a reputation as exactly that. Amy became known for her attentive manner and charitable appearance. She projected the image of someone devoted to helping society's most vulnerable members. Many residents reportedly trusted her completely. Some saw her not merely as an administrator, but almost as a member of their own family. That trust would eventually become one of the most significant aspects of the entire case. The financial structure of Archer Home created circumstances that investigators would later examine closely. Elderly residents sometimes transferred significant assets before or shortly after moving into the home. They rewrote wills, designated Amy as the beneficiary of insurance policies, or arranged for their property to pass into her control after death. At the time, these decisions did not necessarily attract suspicion. Many of the residents were alone. Some had no children. Others had become estranged from distant relatives or simply believed that the woman caring for them deserved to inherit what remained of their estates. Such arrangements were not unheard of in privately operated nursing homes during that era. Nevertheless, they established a financial relationship that would later become impossible to ignore. As Archer Home continued operating, residents came and went, and many inevitably died from age or illness. To neighbors and local physicians, this seemed entirely natural. Elderly people passed away every day, especially those suffering from chronic medical conditions. Few people questioned the number of funerals taking place. Few people imagined that a pattern might exist beneath what appeared to be ordinary mortality. Yet history would remember Archer Home not for the comfort it promised, but for the unanswered questions that slowly gathered around it. Those questions did not emerge overnight. They developed gradually, hidden beneath routine death certificates, accepted medical diagnoses, and the comforting assumption that old age alone explained every tragedy. It would take years before anyone looked closely enough to wonder whether the peaceful home in Windsor concealed something far darker than anyone had ever imagined. And when that scrutiny finally began, investigators would discover that trust, money, illness, and death had become intertwined in ways that would forever change the legacy of Amy Archer Gilligan. At first glance, Archer Home for elderly people and chronic invalids appeared to represent exactly what its name promised. Situated in the quiet community of Windsor, Connecticut, the home projected an atmosphere of safety and reassurance at a time when few alternatives existed for elderly individuals who could no longer live independently. During the early 20th century, the United States had not yet developed the extensive systems of assisted living and long-term care that are familiar today. Families often carried the responsibility of caring for aging relatives, but illness, financial hardship, changing family structures, and geographic distance frequently made that responsibility impossible to fulfill. For widows, widowers, and elderly people without close family, privately operated nursing homes offered one of the few realistic options. Archer Home was established within this historical context, presenting itself as a compassionate solution for those entering the final years of life. The institution welcomed elderly residents as well as individuals suffering from chronic illnesses that required daily assistance. Promotional descriptions emphasized comfort, attentive care, and a peaceful environment where residents could spend their remaining years with dignity rather than isolation. Visitors reportedly encountered an orderly household instead of an intimidating medical institution. The atmosphere reflected the image Amy Archer Gilligan carefully maintained throughout the community. She appeared calm, patient, and deeply devoted to those living under her roof. Her reputation as Sister Amy reinforced the impression that residents were not simply paying for accommodation, but joining a household led by a woman whose compassion extended beyond ordinary business interests. That image mattered enormously because trust became the foundation upon which Archer Home operated. Elderly residents often arrived carrying far more than clothing and personal belongings. They arrived with fears about growing old, uncertainty about their health, and concerns over who would care for them if their conditions worsened. Many had already experienced profound personal loss. Some had buried spouses after decades of marriage. Others had outlived siblings or lifelong friends. A number of residents had no children or had become disconnected from surviving relatives. Loneliness, as much as illness, shaped the lives of many people who entered institutions like Archer Home. Amy's ability to offer reassurance, therefore, became one of her greatest strengths. She presented herself as someone who understood the emotional needs of aging people just as much as their physical needs. Residents reportedly developed deep confidence in her judgment, believing she genuinely wished to improve the quality of their remaining years. Archer Home's financial structure reflected common practices among certain private nursing facilities of the era. Yet it also created circumstances that investigators would later consider significant. Prospective residents generally had two payment options. The first involved paying regular weekly fees to cover room, board, and care. The second option appealed particularly to elderly individuals who wished to eliminate future financial uncertainty. Instead of making continuing payments, they could provide a substantial lump sum payment in exchange for lifetime care. On paper, the arrangement appeared practical for both parties. Residents secured accommodation without worrying about future expenses, while the institution received financial stability that allowed it to continue operating. However, such agreements carried an inherent financial reality. Once a lifetime payment had been made, the nursing home retained that money regardless of how long the resident ultimately lived. If someone survived for many years, the institution might spend more caring for that person than it initially received. If the resident died relatively soon after arriving, however, the business retained the entire payment while no longer bearing the ongoing cost of care. By itself, this financial model did not establish wrongdoing. Similar arrangements existed elsewhere during the period. Nevertheless, it formed part of the broader picture that investigators would later examine when trying to understand events at Archer Home. Financial relationships between Amy and certain residents extended beyond admission fees. According to later testimony and investigative findings, some residents reportedly changed their wills after entering the home. Others designated Amy as the beneficiary of insurance policies or transferred property into arrangements that benefited her financially. Again, none of these decisions automatically indicated criminal conduct. Elderly individuals are legally entitled to leave property to whomever they choose, especially if they have no close relatives or believe a caregiver deserves recognition for years of assistance. Yet when viewed collectively, these financial decisions would eventually raise difficult questions. Why did so many people under Amy's care choose to make similar arrangements? Were these independent decisions motivated by gratitude, or was there another explanation? At the time, however, few people viewed these transactions with suspicion. Amy had successfully established herself as a trustworthy caretaker, and trust often discourages scrutiny. Daily life inside Archer Home likely followed routines familiar to similar institutions of the era. Residents required meals, medication, assistance with mobility, and companionship. Conversations would have filled common rooms as elderly men and women reflected on families, careers, wars, marriages, and the countless experiences accumulated over long lives. For many residents, Archer Home represented the final place they would ever call home. They expected stability, kindness, and medical attention appropriate to the standards of the day. Death itself was not unusual within such an institution. Given the age and health of many residents, funerals occurred with unfortunate regularity. Physicians frequently attributed deaths to natural causes associated with aging or chronic disease. Medical science in the early 20th century lacked many modern laboratory techniques capable of distinguishing between naturally occurring illnesses and deliberate poisoning. Consequently, sudden deterioration among elderly patients rarely generated immediate alarm. Gradually, however, certain deaths began to attract quiet attention. Some residents reportedly appeared healthier than expected shortly before becoming ill. Individuals who had been walking, eating, and conversing without obvious distress suddenly developed severe gastrointestinal symptoms. Intense abdominal pain emerged without warning. Vomiting became persistent. Diarrhea followed. Physical strength disappeared rapidly. In some cases, decline occurred over remarkably short periods before death followed. From a modern medical perspective, such symptoms are consistent with acute arsenic poisoning. Yet those same symptoms also resemble numerous gastrointestinal illnesses that physicians of the period encountered regularly. Diagnostic uncertainty therefore worked against any early recognition that something unusual might be occurring. Doctors often concluded that elderly patients had succumbed to digestive disorders or complications associated with advancing age. Without advanced toxicological testing, there was little reason to challenge those conclusions. As months became years, the number of deaths continued to grow. Each individual passing could still be explained in isolation. Elderly residents die. Chronically ill patients deteriorate. Such events, though tragic, rarely seemed extraordinary. The true significance lay not in any single death, but in the gradual accumulation of similar stories, occurring within the same institution. Yet patterns often remain invisible while events unfold in real time. Only later, when investigators examined records spanning several years, would the concentration of deaths appear striking. Even then, statistics alone could not establish guilt. Investigators would ultimately need evidence connecting financial benefit, repeated poison purchases, medical findings, and individual victims before they could begin constructing a criminal case. At this stage of the story, however, none of those pieces had yet come together. Archer home remained open. New residents continued arriving, hopeful that they had found a secure refuge for the remainder of their lives. Amy Archer Gilligan continued managing the institution with the same composed public image that had earned widespread confidence. Neighbors still saw a respectable caregiver serving vulnerable members of the community. Families still believed they had entrusted loved ones to capable hands. Beneath that confidence, however, events were slowly unfolding that would eventually transform Archer Home from a symbol of care into one of the most infamous locations in the history of American true crime. The questions that would later define the case had not yet been asked. But with every unexpected illness and every quiet funeral, those questions were drawing closer to the surface, waiting for a single death that would finally compel someone to look beyond appearances. Death was never an unexpected visitor at Archer Home. Every resident who crossed its threshold understood, in one way or another, that they had entered the final chapter of life. Some suffered from chronic illnesses that medicine of the early 20th century could do little to treat. Others simply carried the weight of advanced age, their bodies gradually surrendering after decades of labor, family life, hardship, and survival. In such an environment, funerals were not unusual events. They were accepted as an unfortunate but inevitable part of operating a nursing home. Physicians expected elderly patients to deteriorate. Neighbors offered condolences, church services were held, and life continued. That ordinary expectation of mortality would become one of the greatest obstacles to recognizing that something far more troubling might have been unfolding behind the doors of Archer Home. During the years following the home's establishment around 1907, residents continued to arrive seeking stability and compassionate care. Some remained for extended periods, while others stayed only months before illness claimed their lives. Viewed individually, Each death appeared explainable. Families were often told that their loved ones had succumbed to complications associated with age or existing medical conditions. Doctors, working with the limited diagnostic knowledge available at the time, generally accepted those explanations. Few had reason to suspect deliberate poisoning, particularly in a place managed by a woman whose reputation centered on kindness and charity. Yet as time passed, subtle similarities began appearing among several of the deaths. They were not immediately obvious. No single symptom or circumstance alone would have convinced anyone that a crime had occurred. It was only when multiple cases were considered together that a pattern slowly emerged. According to later investigations, several residents who had seemed relatively stable suddenly experienced violent episodes of illness. Individuals who had been eating normally, speaking comfortably with other residents, or walking through the grounds without significant difficulty became gravely ill within an unexpectedly short period. The change was often abrupt. Severe abdominal pain appeared first. Those affected reportedly complained of intense stomach discomfort unlike anything they had previously experienced. This was followed by repeated vomiting and persistent diarrhea, symptoms that quickly weakened already vulnerable patients. Some deteriorated so rapidly that they died within days. Looking back with modern medical knowledge, investigators and historians have noted that these symptoms are consistent with acute arsenic poisoning. Arsenic attacks multiple organ systems and frequently produces severe gastrointestinal distress. Victims may suffer intense pain, dehydration, weakness, and eventual collapse. However, this interpretation must be understood within the context of the era. During the early 20th century, physicians lacked sophisticated laboratory testing capable of routinely identifying toxic substances in living patients. Symptoms resembling arsenic poisoning could easily be mistaken for common digestive illnesses, food poisoning, or complications arising from existing health conditions. Medical records from that period often reflected exactly those conclusions. Consequently, what today might prompt immediate toxicological testing instead appeared to many doctors as an unfortunate but natural decline. The residents themselves had little opportunity to question what was happening. Many were elderly and already coping with chronic medical problems. Sudden illness, while frightening, may have seemed to them like another unavoidable consequence of aging. Those who recovered from temporary sickness would continue their routines. Those who did not were mourned, buried, and gradually became another name in the home's records. Families, too, often accepted official explanations. Few possessed the medical knowledge or resources necessary to challenge physicians' conclusions. Trust in caregivers remained strong, particularly when those caregivers had built reputations for compassion. Amy Archer Gilligan continued to embody that reassuring image. Publicly, she remained the attentive administrator overseeing the daily needs of vulnerable residents. Nothing about her outward appearance suggested that authorities should look more closely at the deaths occurring under her supervision. The apparent normality of daily life at Archer Home therefore concealed growing questions that no one had yet fully articulated. Exactly how many residents died during those years has remained a subject of historical debate. Amy Archer Gilligan was ultimately convicted of only one murder, and that legal reality remains central to understanding the case accurately. Nevertheless, investigators examining the nursing home's history became concerned by the unusually high number of deaths recorded over several years. Contemporary investigators suspected at least 5 poisonings, while some later historical studies suggested the total number of suspicious deaths may have ranged between 40 and 60. Those higher estimates, however, have never been proven in court and remain historical speculation rather than established fact. Distinguishing between proven evidence and later interpretation is essential because the passage of time has inevitably blurred certain details. Many medical records were incomplete by modern standards. Some potential evidence disappeared with the passing decades. What remained were patterns that raised serious questions without always providing definitive answers. One factor contributing to those questions involved timing. According to later investigations, several residents reportedly appeared healthier shortly before their sudden illnesses than physicians would have expected from individuals supposedly nearing natural death. While advanced age alone can never predict precisely when someone will die, investigators considered these rapid declines noteworthy because they occurred repeatedly within the same institution. Similar symptoms, similar timelines, and similar financial outcomes gradually formed a pattern that became increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence once authorities began examining the cases collectively rather than individually. At the time those deaths occurred, however, no broad investigation had yet begun. The legal system generally responded only after specific complaints or suspicious circumstances emerged, without a family member demanding answers or a physician expressing serious concern. Each death remained an isolated event documented by its own certificate and funeral arrangements. Archer Home therefore continued operating without major interruption. New residents arrived to occupy rooms vacated by those who had died. The cycle repeated itself quietly, shielded by the assumptions society held about illness, aging, and mortality. Meanwhile, another development was unfolding that would later become impossible for investigators to ignore. Amy Archer Gilligan's personal financial circumstances appeared to improve over time. On its own, financial success did not establish criminal behavior. A well-managed private nursing home could certainly generate income, particularly if it maintained a good reputation within the community. Yet, as investigators would later discover, financial benefit often coincided with the deaths of particular residents. Some had altered wills. Others had named Amy as the beneficiary of insurance policies or transferred property into arrangements that favored her. During the period when these decisions occurred, they attracted little public attention because each case appeared independent. Viewed collectively years later, however, they contributed to an increasingly disturbing picture. Still, no single event had yet triggered the comprehensive investigation that would eventually expose Archer Home to public scrutiny. That turning point would come through one resident whose death refused to fade quietly into official records. Unlike previous cases, his family questioned the explanation they were given. They refused to accept that a healthy man had simply died from a stomach ailment without further examination. Their persistence would initiate the first serious challenge to the assumptions surrounding Archer Home and begin unraveling the carefully maintained appearance of ordinary tragedy. Until then, Amy Archer Gilligan remained a respected caretaker in the eyes of much of the community. The nursing home continued welcoming vulnerable elderly residents searching for security in their final years. Doctors continued signing death certificates according to the medical understanding of the era. Families continued grieving loved ones whose final illnesses seemed tragic but explainable. Yet beneath those routine procedures lay unanswered questions that had accumulated over nearly a decade. The pattern was becoming too consistent to remain invisible forever. All it required was one death that someone refused to accept at face value. That death would belong to Franklin R. Andrews, and with it the quiet certainty surrounding Archer Home would begin to collapse, replaced by an investigation that would ultimately transform one respected nursing home into the center of one of the most infamous poisoning cases in American criminal history. If the deaths of Archer Home's residents had gradually attracted quiet suspicion, the deaths of the two men Amy Archer Gilligan married introduced another layer of questions that investigators would later struggle to ignore. Neither death alone was enough to establish criminal responsibility, and even today historians are careful to distinguish between documented evidence and enduring suspicion. Yet when authorities eventually reconstructed the sequence of events surrounding Amy's life, they discovered that both marriages ended with funerals, both deaths brought financial benefit, and one of the husbands would later become part of the forensic investigation that helped shape the case against her. Understanding these events is essential because they reveal how the investigation expanded beyond the nursing home's residents and into Amy's personal life, exposing patterns that prosecutors believed demonstrated financial motive. During the early years of Archer Home, Amy managed the institution alongside her first husband, James Archer. Together, they had established the business around 1907 with the goal of providing care for elderly individuals and people suffering from chronic illnesses. The couple operated within a growing industry that attempted to meet the needs of an aging population at a time when public assistance programs remained limited. By most outward appearances, their business functioned successfully. Archer Home gained residents, maintained a respectable reputation, and became a recognized part of the local community. Then, in 1910, James Archer died. Official records attributed his death to Bright's disease, a historical medical term commonly used for several forms of kidney disease. At the time, few people questioned the diagnosis. Kidney disorders were serious medical conditions, and physicians lacked many of the treatments that would become available decades later. James's death therefore appeared unfortunate but medically plausible. Amy, now a widow, continued operating Archer Home. The community largely viewed her as a woman who had endured personal tragedy while continuing to care for vulnerable residents despite her own loss. It was only years later, after criminal investigators began examining her financial history, that James Archer's death attracted renewed attention. Authorities discovered that Amy had purchased a life insurance policy covering her husband shortly before his death. After James died, she received the insurance proceeds. From an investigative perspective, this fact did not prove murder. Purchasing life insurance for a spouse was not unusual, and receiving benefits after a legitimate death was entirely lawful. Nevertheless, when investigators later assembled a broader timeline containing multiple suspicious deaths accompanied by financial gain, James Archer's case became one more event they considered worthy of scrutiny. Unfortunately for investigators, they faced a significant limitation. By the time serious suspicions emerged, James Archer's death had occurred years earlier. His body was not available for timely forensic examination under circumstances that might have allowed investigators to determine conclusively whether poison had played any role. As a result, no scientific evidence ever established that James had been murdered. Modern historians continue to emphasize this distinction. His death remains a historical suspicion rather than a legally proven homicide. This careful separation between evidence and speculation would remain important throughout the Amy Archer Gilligan case because not every suspicious death ultimately produced courtroom-quality proof. Following James Archer's death, Amy assumed sole responsibility for managing Archer Home. Running such an institution required organizational ability, financial management, and constant interaction with residents and their families. Amy appeared capable of handling those responsibilities, and the nursing home continued operating. Public confidence in her largely remained intact. There was little indication that authorities or neighbors regarded her with suspicion during this period. Then, in 1913, Amy married again. Her second husband, Michael Gilligan, was an older man reported to possess financial resources and stable income. The marriage appeared to offer companionship as well as economic security. Yet remarkably, only about 3 months after the wedding, Michael Gilligan died unexpectedly. Once again, Amy inherited significant financial benefits following the death of her spouse. As with James Archer, Michael's death did not immediately provoke widespread accusations. Death among older adults was common, and medical investigations into unexpected fatalities remained relatively limited by the standards of the early 20th century. Had the story ended there, Michael Gilligan might simply have become another name lost within local history. Instead, his death acquired new significance after the investigation into Archer Home eventually began. Authorities ordered the exhumation of Michael Gilligan's body as part of their effort to determine whether a broader pattern of poisoning existed. Forensic examination reportedly detected unusually high levels of arsenic within his remains. To investigators, this finding appeared deeply significant because it aligned with emerging suspicions surrounding several nursing home residents whose illnesses displayed similar symptoms. However, the interpretation of Michael Gilligan's exhumation required caution. Historians have noted that arsenic was sometimes associated with burial practices or environmental contamination during that era, complicating definitive conclusions in certain historical cases. Consequently, while the discovery strengthened investigators' suspicions, it did not eliminate every scientific question surrounding the evidence. Nevertheless, within the broader investigation, Michael Gilligan's exhumation became one of several findings suggesting that authorities should continue examining deaths connected to Amy Archer Gilligan. By 1913, following Michael's death, Amy once again found herself operating Archer Home without a husband. More importantly, from an investigative standpoint, she had become the financial beneficiary of another spouse whose life ended unexpectedly. Viewed independently, neither marriage established criminal conduct. Combined with the growing number of deaths among nursing home residents and the financial arrangements surrounding many of those residents. However, investigators increasingly believed they were observing more than coincidence. Around this period, another pattern reportedly became more noticeable. According to testimony later presented during the investigation, Amy increasingly encouraged certain residents to organize their financial affairs in ways that benefited her directly. Elderly men and women who had entered Archer Home seeking security sometimes revised existing wills. Others designated Amy as the beneficiary of life insurance policies or arranged for property and savings to pass into her possession after death. Such decisions remained legally permissible, particularly for individuals who lacked close family members. Many residents were widows or widowers living alone. Some had no surviving children. Others had become separated from relatives over time. In circumstances like these, it was not unheard of for a trusted caregiver to receive gifts or inheritances from grateful residents. That reality complicated the investigation because prosecutors could not simply argue that every inheritance proved criminal intent. Instead, they would eventually need to demonstrate that financial benefit coincided with deliberate poisoning supported by medical and forensic evidence. This distinction became critical during later court proceedings. Still, investigators found it increasingly difficult to dismiss the recurring financial advantages Amy received following numerous deaths. Every new record they examined seemed to reveal another connection between mortality and inheritance. Some residents had transferred property. Others had revised wills. Insurance benefits repeatedly pointed toward the same beneficiary. Individually, each transaction possessed an innocent explanation. Collectively, they created a pattern that demanded closer examination. Yet despite mounting suspicions, authorities still lacked the decisive case necessary to bring Amy Archer Gilligan before a jury. Patterns alone rarely secure criminal convictions. Prosecutors needed a specific victim whose death could be supported by strong forensic evidence, documented financial motive, and a clear investigative timeline. Without that foundation, even widespread suspicion might never survive courtroom scrutiny. That opportunity emerged through the death of Franklin R. Andrews, a resident whose relationship with Amy differed in important ways from many others living at Archer Home. Andrews was not simply another elderly patient quietly approaching the end of life. He remained active around the property, helping with maintenance and repairs. According to later accounts, he enjoyed Amy's confidence and spent considerable time assisting with everyday tasks. His sudden illness therefore stood out in ways earlier deaths had not. More importantly, questions surrounding his recently changed will prompted family members to challenge the official explanation for his death instead of accepting it without protest. Their determination would become the turning point investigators had been waiting for. After years in which deaths had accumulated with little official scrutiny, Franklin Andrews' case would finally bring law enforcement into Archer home with a level of attention that previous tragedies had never received. The carefully maintained image of compassion that surrounded Amy Archer Gilligan was about to face its first sustained challenge. And once investigators began examining one suspicious death, they would soon discover evidence that encouraged them to revisit many others that had long since been buried. By the time Amy Archer Gilligan entered the second decade of operating Archer Home, the institution had become more than simply a residence for elderly people and individuals living with chronic illnesses. It had also become the center of an increasingly complex network of financial relationships built upon trust. Every resident who chose to spend the remainder of life under Amy's care placed extraordinary confidence in the woman managing the home. They trusted her with their health, their daily comfort, and in many cases, the legal and financial decisions that would determine what happened to everything they owned after their deaths. That trust would later become one of the most important elements of the investigation. Not because trust itself suggested criminal behavior, but because it explained how Amy repeatedly found herself in positions where she benefited financially from those under her care. According to evidence later examined by investigators, some residents of Archer Home revised their personal affairs after arriving at the nursing home. Wills were rewritten, existing beneficiaries were replaced, property ownership changed. Insurance policies named Amy Archer Gilligan as the recipient of future payments. Savings and financial assets were sometimes arranged in ways that favored the woman responsible for caring for them. None of these actions, considered individually, violated the law. Elderly people possess the legal right to decide how their estates will be distributed. A person without close family members may reasonably choose to reward a trusted caregiver who provided companionship and assistance during difficult years. Throughout history, nurses, caregivers, and friends have occasionally inherited property from grateful individuals who believed kindness deserved recognition. For that reason, the existence of these financial arrangements alone could never establish criminal intent. The challenge for investigators would eventually be determining whether the repeated pattern represented genuine gratitude or something far more troubling. To understand why so many residents may have placed such confidence in Amy, it is important to consider the circumstances under which many of them entered Archer Home. A significant number were living alone before arriving. Some had already lost husbands or wives after decades of marriage. Others had no children capable of providing full-time care. Several residents were elderly individuals whose closest relatives lived far away or maintained little contact with them. For people facing declining health, loneliness often became as painful as physical illness itself. Entering a private nursing home meant more than receiving meals or medical attention. It meant surrendering independence and relying completely upon strangers for daily survival. In that environment, emotional bonds between residents and caregivers could become remarkably strong. Amy reportedly cultivated exactly that image. She was viewed by many as a compassionate administrator dedicated to ensuring that elderly people spent their final years with dignity. The nickname Sister Amy reflected not only perceptions of kindness, but also an image of moral respectability. Residents who believed they had found someone genuinely concerned for their well-being may have considered it entirely reasonable to include her in their estate planning. From their perspective, they were rewarding the person who had cared for them when no one else could. Investigators later viewed those same decisions through an entirely different lens. As they reconstructed financial records, they discovered that Amy repeatedly benefited after residents died. The pattern itself did not prove murder, but it raised an unavoidable question. Why did so many financial transfers ultimately favor the same individual? Was this the natural result of years spent caring for lonely elderly people? Or did financial gain provide a motive connected to the unusual number of deaths occurring at Archer Home? These questions remained unanswered for years because each individual case appeared isolated. One inheritance rarely attracts widespread attention. Several might still be explained by circumstance. It was only after investigators began comparing multiple cases side by side that the broader pattern became visible. The repeated appearance of Amy's name in wills, insurance documents, and property transfers gradually transformed what had once seemed like unrelated personal decisions into evidence requiring careful examination. Even then, authorities understood that motive alone could never support a murder conviction. Financial benefit explains why someone might commit a crime, but it does not establish that a crime actually occurred. Prosecutors would eventually need medical evidence, witness testimony, documentary records, and forensic findings capable of connecting motive with deliberate action. Nevertheless, the financial records gave investigators an important direction. They no longer viewed the deaths at Archer Home simply as isolated medical events. Instead, they began asking whether those deaths consistently produced economic advantages for the woman operating the institution. While these financial relationships quietly accumulated over time, daily life at Archer Home continued much as it always had. New residents arrived seeking security during old age. Existing residents maintained routines shaped by advancing years and chronic illness. Meals were served, conversations continued, and visitors occasionally came to spend time with loved ones. Outwardly, little appeared different from countless other private nursing homes operating throughout New England during the same era. Yet beneath that appearance, circumstances were slowly moving toward a turning point. The individual who would eventually trigger the collapse of Amy's carefully maintained public image was not simply another resident whose death passed quietly into official records. His case stood apart because it prompted immediate concern from those who knew him. His name was Franklin R. Andrews. Unlike many residents requiring constant care, Franklin Andrews remained active around Archer Home. According to later accounts presented during the investigation, he frequently assisted with maintenance work and repairs throughout the property. Rather than spending his days confined by illness, he contributed practical labor whenever help was needed. This level of activity distinguished him from many other residents and influenced how his family later viewed the circumstances surrounding his death. Andrews was reportedly trusted by Amy and spent considerable time working around the nursing home. According to testimony referenced during the legal proceedings, Amy even spoke of him in favorable terms, suggesting that he had become an important and dependable presence within the institution. Such familiarity made subsequent events even more surprising. Before his death, Franklin Andrews reportedly altered his will, leaving a significant portion of his estate to Amy Archer Gilligan. Like similar financial decisions made by other residents, the change was legally permissible. Yet when considered alongside what happened next, it became one of the most significant pieces of evidence examined by investigators. In 1914, while reportedly painting a fence at Archer Home, Andrews suddenly became seriously ill. Witnesses later described how he experienced severe abdominal pain without warning. He was taken inside the home, where his condition deteriorated rapidly. Within approximately 2 days, he was dead. The official explanation recorded on his death certificate attributed his passing to a stomach ulcer. Given the medical knowledge available at the time, such a diagnosis did not immediately provoke official alarm. Digestive disorders frequently proved fatal before the development of modern treatments, and physicians often relied upon clinical observation rather than laboratory confirmation when determining causes of death. For many cases, that approach was accepted without challenge. Franklin Andrews' family, however, refused to accept the explanation so easily. They knew that he had recently changed his will in Amy's favor. They also believed that he had been healthier than someone expected to die suddenly from a stomach ailment. Instead of quietly accepting the official diagnosis, they began asking difficult questions. Why had a man who had remained active around the property become gravely ill so suddenly? Why had his decline been so rapid? And why had his financial affairs changed shortly before his death? Their concerns marked the first significant break in the pattern that had protected Archer home from close scrutiny for years. Previous deaths had largely been accepted as unfortunate consequences of old age or chronic illness. Andrew's family insisted that authorities look more closely. Their persistence transformed one suspicious death into the beginning of a criminal investigation. What initially appeared to be a dispute over a single estate would soon expand into something far larger. Investigators examining Franklin Andrews' death would not stop with one death certificate or one inheritance. They would begin reviewing years of records, financial documents, wills, insurance policies, and medical histories connected to Archer home. As those pieces gradually came together, authorities would discover that Franklin Andrews' case was not standing alone. Instead, it appeared to fit within a broader pattern stretching back years. A pattern involving repeated deaths, repeated financial benefits, and repeated opportunities that all pointed toward the same woman. The questions raised by one determined family would ultimately expose one of the most disturbing investigations in early 20th century American criminal history, setting in motion the inquiry that would finally bring Amy Archer Gilligan under the full attention of law enforcement. The death of Franklin R. Andrews marked the moment when years of quiet suspicion began to transform into a formal criminal investigation. Until then, each death connected to Archer home had been treated largely as an individual tragedy. Physicians certified causes of death according to the medical knowledge available at the time. Grieving families buried their loved ones, and life in Windsor continued without sustained public scrutiny. Andrews' case was different because his family refused to allow it to disappear into routine paperwork. They believed too many details failed to make sense, and their determination to seek answers forced authorities to examine not only one death, but the entire history of Amy Archer Gilligan's nursing home. Franklin Andrews had become a familiar presence around Archer home. Unlike many residents who spent most of their time confined by illness or advanced age, Andrews remained active and useful. According to later accounts, he regularly assisted with maintenance work, helping with repairs and other practical tasks around the property. He was reportedly trusted by Amy and played a role that extended beyond that of a typical resident. His willingness to help around the home made him well known within the institution and contributed to the perception that he enjoyed a particularly positive relationship with its owner. That relationship would later receive considerable attention during the investigation, especially after evidence emerged concerning his financial affairs. Before his death, Andrews reportedly changed his will, leaving a substantial portion of his estate to Amy Archer Gilligan. Standing alone, such a decision could have reflected gratitude toward a caregiver whom he believed had improved his quality of life. Investigators understood that elderly individuals without close family sometimes rewarded trusted caretakers through inheritance. The legal act of naming Amy as a beneficiary therefore proved nothing by itself. Yet investigators also understood that timing matters. When a person unexpectedly changes a will shortly before dying under unusual circumstances, those events inevitably attract closer examination. According to the evidence later presented, the sequence of events surrounding Franklin Andrews' final days unfolded rapidly. In 1914, while reportedly painting a fence on the Archer home property, Andrews suddenly became ill. The onset of his symptoms appeared abrupt rather than gradual. He experienced severe abdominal pain that forced him to stop working. Those nearby brought him inside the house, where his condition continued to worsen. Instead of recovering after rest or medical attention, Andrews declined quickly over the next 2 days. He reportedly suffered symptoms that included intense stomach distress before eventually dying. His death certificate listed the cause as a stomach ulcer. At the time, that diagnosis did not immediately appear impossible. Medical understanding during the early 20th century remained limited compared with modern standards, and serious digestive illnesses frequently proved fatal. Physicians lacked sophisticated imaging technology, advanced laboratory testing, and many of the treatments that later generations would consider routine. Consequently, stomach ulcers and other gastrointestinal disorders sometimes became broad explanations for patients whose symptoms involved severe abdominal pain and rapid physical decline. For local authorities, there was initially little reason to question the physician's conclusion. Franklin Andrews, however, left behind relatives who viewed the circumstances differently. Family members reportedly found it difficult to believe that a man active enough to perform physical work around the property had suddenly died from what appeared to be a stomach ailment. Even more concerning to them was the recent change to his will. Learning that Amy Archer Gilligan stood to benefit financially from Andrews' estate intensified their suspicions. Rather than accepting the official explanation, they requested further investigation into his death. Their insistence became the catalyst that finally brought law enforcement into Archer home with a level of scrutiny the institution had never before experienced. Investigators began where most complex financial homicide cases begin, by examining records. Instead of focusing exclusively on Franklin Andrews' medical history, authorities widened their inquiry to include the operation of Archer home itself. They reviewed admission records, death certificates, financial documents, insurance information, and legal paperwork connected to residents who had died while under Amy's care. Almost immediately, investigators noticed patterns that appeared increasingly difficult to dismiss as coincidence. One of the first discoveries involved the overall number of deaths associated with the nursing home. Authorities believed the mortality rate appeared unusually high compared with what they expected from similar institutions. While elderly residents naturally die at higher rates than younger populations, investigators became concerned that Archer home seemed to experience an exceptional number of fatalities over several years. By itself, a high death rate could not establish criminal conduct. The home's residents were elderly, and many suffered chronic illnesses. Nevertheless, the statistical pattern encouraged investigators to continue looking deeper rather than closing the case after reviewing Franklin Andrews' records alone. Financial documents produced another troubling pattern. Authorities found repeated instances in which Amy Archer Gilligan benefited financially after residents died. Wills had been altered. Insurance policies named her as beneficiary. Property transfers and inheritance arrangements repeatedly directed assets toward the woman managing the nursing home. Investigators carefully documented these transactions, recognizing that each individual case might possess an innocent explanation while the combined pattern warranted closer examination. They did not conclude that every inheritance resulted from criminal behavior. Instead, they asked whether repeated financial benefit, viewed alongside unusual deaths, suggested a possible motive that deserved further investigation. The inquiry then expanded beyond legal records into commercial transactions. Detectives visited pharmacies serving the Windsor area, hoping to determine whether Amy had purchased substances capable of causing the symptoms described in several deaths. Pharmacists proved to be important witnesses. According to the investigation, multiple pharmacists confirmed that Amy Archer Gilligan had purchased arsenic on numerous occasions. She reportedly explained that the poison was needed to eliminate rats and other pests around the property. Such an explanation sounded reasonable on its face. Arsenic was widely available during that period and commonly used as a pesticide and rodent poison. Purchasing small quantities for legitimate purposes would not necessarily have attracted attention. What concerned investigators was not merely the existence of these purchases, but their frequency and quantity. Pharmacy records reportedly showed that Amy had purchased more than 10 ounces of arsenic over time. Authorities regarded this amount as significant because it greatly exceeded what they believed would ordinarily be required for routine pest control at a private nursing home. Combined with the symptoms reported before numerous deaths, the discovery intensified suspicion that arsenic might have played a role in events at Archer home. Still, investigators recognized that purchases alone could not prove poisoning. Arsenic had legitimate commercial uses, and possession of poison did not establish that it had been administered to any particular individual. The investigation therefore required stronger physical evidence linking the substance directly to victims. As detectives assembled witness statements, financial records, medical histories, and pharmacy documents, they gradually reached a conclusion that would fundamentally alter the direction of the case. If arsenic had indeed been used, the most compelling evidence might still exist within the bodies of those already buried. Authorities, therefore, made the extraordinary decision to exhume several former residents and individuals connected to Amy Archer Gilligan. Exhumation represented a serious step, undertaken only because investigators believed sufficient grounds now existed to question earlier causes of death. The first and most important examination focused on Franklin Andrews, whose death had initiated the investigation. Other exhumations followed, including that of Michael Gilligan. Investigators hoped modern forensic techniques available at the time would reveal whether poison remained detectable despite the passage of years. Their decision reflected growing confidence that the case had progressed beyond mere suspicion. They now possessed financial motives, documentary evidence of repeated inheritances, records showing substantial arsenic purchases, and a sequence of deaths displaying remarkably similar symptoms. What they still lacked was definitive forensic confirmation. If toxic substances could be identified within the exhumed remains, the investigation would move from circumstantial concern towards scientific evidence capable of supporting criminal prosecution. As workers prepared to open graves that many families believe had been closed forever, the quiet cemetery became the next stage in an investigation unlike anything Windsor had experienced. The answers investigators sought no longer rested inside financial ledgers or pharmacy records. They lay beneath the earth, waiting to reveal whether years of unexplained illness had truly been natural tragedy or the hidden legacy of deliberate poisoning. The decision to exhume the bodies of former residents and individuals connected to Amy Archer Gilligan marked one of the most dramatic turning points in the investigation. Until that moment, detectives had assembled a compelling collection of circumstantial evidence. They had identified an unusually high number of deaths associated with Archer home. They had uncovered financial records showing that Amy repeatedly benefited from the estates, insurance policies, and property of deceased residents. Pharmacists had confirmed that she had purchased arsenic numerous times, explaining that it was intended for rat control, while records suggested that the quantity acquired greatly exceeded what investigators considered ordinary household use. Yet despite these discoveries, prosecutors understood that motive and opportunity alone would not be enough to persuade a jury. To establish that a murder had actually occurred, they needed scientific evidence demonstrating that poison had been present within the victims themselves. Investigators therefore turned to forensic medicine, hoping that the dead could answer questions the living no longer could. Franklin R. Andrews became the central focus of this effort. His death had triggered the investigation after relatives questioned the official explanation that a stomach ulcer had caused his sudden decline. According to the evidence already gathered, Andrews had recently changed his will in Amy's favor, had remained active before his illness, and had died only 2 days after becoming suddenly sick while painting a fence at Archer home. These circumstances made his case the strongest candidate for detailed forensic examination. When his body was exhumed, specialists carefully analyzed the available remains using the toxicological methods of the period. Their findings proved highly significant. Investigators reported that Franklin Andrews' body contained a large quantity of arsenic, particularly within the stomach and other tissues examined during the investigation. The concentration was considered far greater than would normally be expected from accidental environmental exposure or medicinal use common during the era. For prosecutors, this represented the first direct scientific evidence supporting the theory that poisoning had occurred. Although forensic science in the early 20th century lacked many of the sophisticated techniques available today, Arsenic possessed one characteristic that made it especially important in historical investigations. Unlike many poisons that break down rapidly after death, arsenic can remain detectable in human remains long after burial. This property allowed investigators to revisit deaths that had occurred months or even years earlier, making exhumation a valuable investigative tool whenever poisoning was suspected. Encouraged by the findings in Franklin Andrews' case, authorities broadened their forensic inquiry. Among the next individuals selected for exhumation was Michael Gilligan, Amy's second husband. His sudden death only a few months after their marriage had already attracted attention because Amy had inherited his property and financial assets. When specialists examined Michael Gilligan's remains, they also reported the presence of unusually high levels of arsenic. The discovery appeared consistent with the growing theory that poison had played a role in multiple deaths connected to Amy Archer Gilligan. Nevertheless, investigators and later historians acknowledged an important limitation. Because considerable time had passed since Michael Gilligan's burial, and because arsenic had sometimes been associated with historical preservation practices or environmental contamination, interpretation of these findings required caution. The presence of arsenic strengthened suspicion, but it did not automatically eliminate every possible alternative explanation. This distinction would remain important throughout the legal proceedings because prosecutors sought to present only evidence capable of withstanding careful examination in court. Authorities did not stop with Andrews and Michael Gilligan. Several additional former residents of Archer home were also exhumed as investigators attempted to determine whether the apparent pattern extended beyond these two cases. According to the historical record provided, some of those examinations revealed traces of arsenic or other toxic substances, including reports involving strychnine in certain instances. However, not every exhumation produced equally conclusive findings. Differences in burial conditions, the passage of time, and the limitations of early 20th century forensic methods affected the strength of available evidence. As a result, investigators recognized that while the broader pattern appeared increasingly suspicious, not every individual death could be proven beyond reasonable doubt. This realization would significantly influence the strategy adopted by prosecutors when formal charges were eventually filed. Throughout the forensic investigation, authorities carefully distinguished between evidence suitable for courtroom presentation and evidence that merely raised additional suspicion. Detectives may have believed that Archer home had witnessed numerous poisonings, but criminal convictions require proof, not speculation. They therefore focused on identifying the strongest possible case supported by medical findings, documentary records, financial motive, and witness testimony. Franklin Andrews' death clearly emerged as that case. His exhumation had produced substantial evidence of arsenic. His recent will benefited Amy financially. His sudden illness followed a pattern similar to other suspicious deaths. Most importantly, his family had already questioned the official explanation, providing investigators with a well-documented starting point for the entire inquiry. As forensic results accumulated, the broader picture confronting law enforcement became increasingly difficult to ignore. Investigators now possessed several interconnected categories of evidence. Financial records suggested repeated monetary benefit following deaths. Pharmacy records documented repeated arsenic purchases over an extended period. Medical histories described remarkably similar symptoms among several deceased individuals, including severe abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea, rapid physical decline, and death within a relatively short period. Exhumations had identified arsenic in Franklin Andrews and Michael Gilligan, while additional examinations revealed suspicious toxic findings in certain other cases. Each category of evidence reinforced the others. Standing alone, none necessarily established murder. Combined, they created a compelling narrative that prosecutors believed could persuade a jury beyond reasonable doubt in at least one carefully selected case. Investigators also appreciated the importance of avoiding overreach. Attempting to prosecute numerous deaths supported only by partial evidence risked weakening the entire case. Instead, authorities concentrated on the victim for whom the evidence appeared strongest. Franklin Andrews became the centerpiece of the prosecution because his case united nearly every significant element uncovered during the investigation. The forensic findings were substantial. The financial motive was documented. The unusual circumstances surrounding his illness had prompted immediate concern from relatives. Witnesses could describe his condition before his sudden collapse, and pharmacy records helped establish Amy's access to arsenic. By limiting the criminal case primarily to Andrew's death, prosecutors increased their chances of securing a conviction rather than attempting to prove allegations that remained historically suspicious but legally uncertain. While investigators completed their reports, public attention increasingly focused on Archer Home. A nursing home once known as a place of care had become associated with grave exhumations, poison analyses, inheritance records, and allegations of calculated murder. The contrast between Amy Archer Gilligan's carefully cultivated image as Sister Amy and the evidence emerging from the investigation fascinated both local communities and the wider public. People struggled to reconcile the compassionate caregiver they believed they knew with the possibility that vulnerable residents had instead been exploited for financial gain. Yet even as speculation spread, prosecutors remained bound by the evidence. They could not ask a jury to convict Amy based upon rumor or suspicion regarding dozens of deaths. Their responsibility was to present a carefully constructed case grounded in documented facts. After months of investigation, authorities concluded they had gathered sufficient evidence to proceed. Amy Archer Gilligan was formally arrested and charged, with Franklin Andrews' death serving as the principal foundation of the prosecution. The courtroom would now become the next stage of the story. Their forensic specialists, pharmacists, investigators, financial records, and witness testimony would all be presented before a jury tasked with answering the question that had haunted Archer Home for years: whether the woman trusted to protect the elderly had instead deliberately ended the life of one of the people placed in her care. The investigation had uncovered patterns, motives, and scientific findings. The trial would determine whether those discoveries were enough to establish guilt under the law. The trial of Amy Archer Gilligan became the final stage of an investigation that had transformed a quiet nursing home in Windsor, Connecticut, into the center of national attention. For years, Archer Home had represented security and compassion for elderly people seeking care during the final period of their lives. Now, the same institution stood at the heart of a criminal case involving accusations of deception, financial exploitation, and deliberate poisoning. The prosecution faced a difficult task. Although investigators had uncovered a troubling pattern of deaths and financial connections, the legal system required them to prove a specific crime against a specific victim. Suspicion surrounding numerous deaths could create a powerful narrative, but a criminal conviction depended on evidence that could withstand careful examination in court. For this reason, prosecutors focused their case primarily on the death of Franklin R. Andrews, the resident whose family had first questioned what happened and whose exhumation had produced the strongest forensic evidence. When Amy Archer Gilligan appeared before the court in 1917, the atmosphere surrounding the case was shaped by the contrast between her public reputation and the accusations against her. For years, many people in Windsor had known her as Sister Amy, a woman who appeared devoted to caring for elderly residents. She had built Archer Home around the image of compassion and personal attention. Residents and their families had trusted her with some of the most vulnerable moments of human life: illness, dependency, and old age. The prosecution now argued that this trust had been manipulated for financial gain. According to their theory, Amy had used her position as caregiver to identify vulnerable individuals, gain control over their financial affairs, and ultimately benefit when they died. The defense faced the challenge of explaining away a significant amount of suspicious evidence. They argued that the deaths at Archer Home occurred among a population naturally vulnerable to illness and mortality. The residents were elderly. Many suffered from chronic conditions. Some had entered the facility precisely because they required medical assistance. From this perspective, a high number of deaths in a nursing home did not automatically indicate criminal activity. The defense emphasized that Amy's role as beneficiary in various wills and insurance policies did not itself prove wrongdoing. Elderly residents without close family members sometimes chose to leave their property to people who cared for them. And Amy's position as the home's administrator made her a natural recipient of gratitude from those who believe she had helped them. One of the central issues before the court was the evidence surrounding arsenic. Prosecutors presented forensic findings from Franklin Andrews' exhumation, arguing that the presence of a significant amount of arsenic in his remains demonstrated that he had not died from a natural stomach condition as originally recorded. They connected this evidence with testimony regarding Amy's purchases of arsenic from local pharmacies. According to investigators, Amy had acquired more than 10 ounces of arsenic over time, explaining that she needed it to eliminate rats and pests around Archer home. Prosecutors argued that the quantity purchased was far beyond what would reasonably be required for that purpose. They suggested that the poison purchases provided Amy with both the means and opportunity to commit murder. The prosecution also relied heavily on witness testimony. Individuals familiar with Archer home described the unusual circumstances surrounding certain deaths and the financial arrangements that followed them. Witnesses explained how some residents had changed wills or directed assets toward Amy before dying. They described the repeated pattern of financial benefit that followed the deaths of those under her care. Prosecutors argued that these facts, combined with medical evidence and poison purchases, demonstrated a clear motive. The argument presented to the jury was not based on one isolated event, but on a sequence of connected circumstances. According to the prosecution, the same pattern appeared repeatedly. Elderly individuals entered Archer home. Amy gained their confidence. Financial arrangements changed. Illness appeared suddenly, and Amy benefited afterward. The defense challenged this interpretation. They argued that the prosecution was attempting to transform unfortunate coincidences into evidence of murder. They pointed out that no witness had ever seen Amy administer poison to Franklin Andrews. No one could testify that they personally observed her placing arsenic into food or medicine. The defense maintained that scientific evidence alone did not prove how arsenic entered Andrews' body or who was responsible. They suggested that alternative explanations remained possible and that the prosecution's case relied too heavily on assumptions. Another significant challenge for the prosecution was the broader question surrounding other suspected victims. Investigators believed Amy might have been responsible for multiple deaths, but the court could only consider evidence directly relevant to the charges presented. The suspicion that dozens of people may have died under questionable circumstances created public interest, but it could not replace the need to prove the specific allegation involving Franklin Andrews. Prosecutors therefore carefully presented evidence connected to his death while using the larger pattern only to help establish motive and context. The trial became a confrontation between two competing interpretations of events. The prosecution portrayed Amy Archer Gilligan as a calculated individual who exploited elderly residents and used poison as a means of increasing her wealth. The defense portrayed her as a businesswoman operating within the realities of early 20th century elder care. A woman surrounded by deaths that were tragic but not necessarily criminal. The jury had to decide whether the evidence showed deliberate murder or whether the circumstances merely appeared suspicious because of coincidence and misunderstanding. After considering the testimony, financial records, medical evidence, and forensic findings, the jury reached its decision. Amy Archer Gilligan was found guilty of murdering Franklin R. Andrews. The verdict represented a dramatic fall from the image she had carefully maintained for years. The woman once recognized in her community as a caretaker was now officially identified as a Convicted murderer. The initial sentence reflected the seriousness of the crime. Amy was sentenced to death. However, the legal process did not end with the first verdict. Her defense team challenged the conviction and sought another opportunity to contest the case. The appeal process focused on procedural issues rather than completely changing the facts surrounding the investigation. Ultimately, Amy received a new trial. During the second trial, the defense shifted its strategy. Instead of primarily arguing that the evidence was insufficient, they emphasized questions regarding Amy's mental condition. The argument suggested that psychological issues affected her responsibility for her actions. This approach changed the direction of the proceedings and introduced a new question. Not only what Amy had done, but also whether she possessed the mental capacity to be held fully responsible in the same way as an ordinary defendant. The second trial ended differently from the first. Amy Archer Gilligan accepted a conviction for second-degree murder, and the death sentence was reduced to life imprisonment. The legal outcome meant that she would spend the remainder of her life behind bars rather than face execution. Although she escaped the original punishment imposed after her first conviction, the verdict permanently established her place in American criminal history. The trial had answered the central legal question regarding Franklin Andrews' death. However, it left many other questions unresolved. How many people had truly died because of Amy Archer Gilligan? Was Franklin Andrews the only victim, or merely the only case that prosecutors could prove beyond reasonable doubt? Those questions continued to surround the case long after the courtroom proceedings ended. The law had reached its conclusion, but history continued examining the unexplained deaths connected to Archer home. The conviction of Amy Archer Gilligan closed one chapter of the investigation. Yet it also opened a broader discussion about vulnerability, trust, and the dangers faced by elderly people placed entirely in the care of others. The case had revealed how easily a respected public image could conceal serious wrongdoing and how difficult it could be to uncover crimes committed quietly over time. For the families who had lost loved ones, the verdict provided a measure of accountability. But for many, the unanswered questions surrounding Archer home remained a haunting reminder that not every tragedy receives a complete explanation. Following her conviction, Amy Archer Gilligan entered a new and very different phase of life. The woman who had once managed Archer home, welcomed elderly residents, and presented herself as a devoted caretaker was now a convicted murderer serving a life sentence. The trial had established her legal responsibility for the death of Franklin R. Andrews, but it had not completely answered every question surrounding the years she spent operating her nursing home. In many ways, the courtroom brought a conclusion to the legal case while leaving history with a series of unresolved questions. The most important of those questions remained the same. How many people had truly died because of Amy Archer Gilligan? The official answer was limited. She had been convicted of one murder. The law recognized one proven victim, Franklin R. Andrews. Yet the investigation that led to her conviction had uncovered circumstances suggesting that his death may not have been an isolated event. The unusually high number of deaths at Archer home, the financial benefits connected to those deaths, and the presence of poison in certain examined remains created lasting suspicion that many other residents may have also been victims. However, suspicion and proof are not the same. The passage of time, limited records, and the challenges of early 20th century forensic science prevented authorities from definitively proving every suspected case. Investigators at the time believed at least 5 deaths could potentially be connected to Amy's actions. Those cases involved individuals whose deaths displayed similarities to the circumstances surrounding Franklin Andrews. Some had experienced sudden illnesses involving severe stomach pain and rapid physical decline. Some had financial arrangements that benefited Amy after their deaths. Some were among the residents whose remains were examined and showed evidence of toxic substances. These cases strengthened the belief that Archer home may have been the site of multiple poisonings. Yet not every suspected death produced enough evidence for a criminal charge. A murder investigation requires more than a troubling pattern. It requires a clear connection between a specific victim, a specific act, and a specific person responsible. For many of the deaths associated with Archer Home, that connection remained incomplete. Later historical studies expanded the possible scale of the tragedy even further. Some researchers suggested that the number of victims might have reached 40 or more, with certain estimates extending even higher. These figures were based largely on the unusually high mortality rate recorded at Archer Home during Amy's years of management and the suspicious circumstances surrounding some residents' deaths. However, these larger estimates remain unproven. They represent historical speculation rather than established facts. The only confirmed conviction remained the murder of Franklin Andrews. This distinction is essential because the case has often been discussed through the lens of the possibility that Amy was responsible for dozens of deaths. While that possibility has contributed to her reputation as one of America's most notorious female killers, historians must separate what is documented from what remains uncertain. The years following her conviction were marked by imprisonment and declining public attention. In 1924, Amy was declared mentally ill and transferred to a state psychiatric hospital in Connecticut. The decision reflected the legal and medical attitudes of the time, when questions about mental responsibility were often handled differently than they are today. Instead of remaining in a traditional prison environment for the rest of her sentence, Amy spent her remaining years in psychiatric care. The woman who had once controlled every aspect of Archer Home's operations had lost all influence over her own circumstances. Her final decades passed far away from the community where her crimes had been discovered. Amy Archer Gilligan remained at the psychiatric hospital until her death in 1962. She was approximately 93 years old. Her long life created an unusual contrast with the lives of those whose deaths had defined her. Legacy. Many of her suspected victims had entered Archer Home believing they had found protection and dignity during their final years. Instead, their deaths became the center of one of the most disturbing criminal investigations in American history. While Amy lived into old age, many families continued carrying unanswered questions about relatives who had died under her care. The case also had a broader impact beyond the individuals directly involved. The exposure of conditions at Archer Home contributed to increased awareness about the importance of oversight in private nursing facilities. At the beginning of the 20th century, many institutions caring for elderly people operated with limited supervision compared with modern standards. Families often had few tools to evaluate the quality of care provided, and authorities had limited systems for monitoring unusual patterns of death. The Archer Home investigation demonstrated the importance of accountability when vulnerable. Individuals depended entirely upon caregivers. It also highlighted the difficulty of identifying crimes committed through trust and dependency, rather than obvious violence. Amy Archer Gilligan did not fit the traditional image many people associated with dangerous criminals. She did not become known because of public attacks or acts of visible brutality. Instead, the accusations against her involved a quieter form of harm, one that allegedly occurred within a place designed to provide comfort. The alleged method was poison, a crime that could initially resemble natural illness and therefore remain hidden for years. The circumstances of the case forced investigators and the public to consider a disturbing possibility. That danger could exist behind a familiar face and within an environment created to protect the vulnerable. The story of Archer Home also revealed the complicated relationship between evidence, suspicion, and historical memory. Over time, Amy Archer Gilligan became associated with claims that she may have killed dozens of people. Those claims contributed to her reputation as one of the most infamous female criminals in American history. However, the strongest and most reliable account remains centered on the evidence presented at trial. Franklin Andrews was the victim whose death prosecutors successfully connected to Amy through forensic findings, financial motive, and investigative evidence. Other suspected victims remain part of the historical discussion, but their cases cannot be treated with the same certainty. This careful approach does not diminish the seriousness of the case. Even one proven murder involving a caregiver and a vulnerable resident represented a profound betrayal of trust. The possibility that additional individuals may have suffered similar fates only deepens the historical significance of what occurred at Archer Home. The tragedy was not only the loss of life, but also the exploitation of people who entered the institution seeking security during a period of vulnerability. Decades after Amy Archer Gilligan's death, the case continues to attract attention because it contains many elements that make criminal investigations especially challenging. There was no single dramatic event that immediately revealed the truth. Instead, the case unfolded slowly through patterns, repeated deaths, financial connections, unusual symptoms, and the determination of relatives who refused to accept explanations that seemed incomplete. Franklin Andrews' family's decision to question his death became the action that allowed investigators to look beyond individual tragedies and examine the larger picture. Without that persistence, the events at Archer Home might have remained buried beneath ordinary death certificates and forgotten records. Ultimately, the legacy of Amy Archer Gilligan is defined by contradiction. She was a woman who built her public identity around caring for people who had nowhere else to turn, yet she became remembered because of accusations that she betrayed those very individuals. She operated a home that promised protection while becoming associated with fear and suspicion. Her story remains one of the most disturbing examples of alleged financial-motivated poisoning in American history, not only because of the crimes proven in court, but because of the unanswered questions that continue to surround the deaths that occurred under her care. The final judgment of history is therefore more complex than a single verdict. The law determined that Amy Archer Gilligan murdered Franklin Andrews. Historical investigation continues to examine the possibility of additional victims. Between those two realities lies the enduring mystery of Archer Home, a place that appeared to offer peace and care, but which became forever connected with one of the darkest chapters in the history of American elder care. The story of Amy Archer Gilligan remains one of the most unsettling examples of how appearances, trust, and vulnerability can intersect in the history of American crime. More than a century after the investigation began, the case continues to raise questions about the responsibilities of caregivers, the importance of protecting vulnerable individuals, and the difficulty of recognizing wrongdoing when it is hidden behind a reputation for kindness. The tragedy of Archer Home was not only about the death of one confirmed victim or the accusations surrounding many others. It was also about the confidence placed in a person who appeared to represent safety at a time when many elderly people had few alternatives and depended completely on those responsible for their care. Amy Archer Gilligan's story began with a very ordinary ambition. She was not initially known as a criminal figure. She was a woman who entered the growing field of private elder care during a period when many families struggled to provide long-term assistance for aging relatives. Around 1907, she and her first husband, James Archer, established Archer Home for elderly people and chronic invalids in Windsor, Connecticut. The institution presented itself as a place where elderly people and those suffering from chronic illnesses could receive attention and comfort. Residents arrived believing they had found a secure environment where their remaining years would be treated with dignity. Amy built a public image around compassion. She became known as Sister Amy, a name that reflected the perception that she was devoted to helping those who needed support. To many outsiders, she appeared to be exactly the type of person society wanted caring for the elderly, organized, attentive, and willing to accept responsibility for people who had become dependent on others. That image became one of the most important elements of the case because the accusations against her were so different from the identity she had created. The investigation revealed a darker possibility. Authorities believed Amy had used the trust placed in her for personal financial gain. The evidence presented during the investigation suggested that several residents had made financial arrangements benefiting her before their deaths. Some changed wills. Some named her as the beneficiary of insurance policies. Others transferred assets in ways that allowed Amy to profit after they were gone. Again, these actions alone were not crimes. Elderly individuals had the legal right to decide who would inherit their possessions. Some people without close family members naturally chose to reward those who provided care and companionship. However, investigators argued that the repeated connection between financial benefit and sudden deaths created a pattern that could not be ignored. The most important turning point came with Franklin R. Andrews. His death transformed suspicion into a criminal investigation. Unlike many other residents whose deaths had been accepted without challenge, Andrews' family questioned the explanation they received. They knew he had remained active around Archer home. They knew he had recently changed his will in Amy's favor. They believed the circumstances surrounding his sudden illness and death required closer examination. Their decision to demand answers eventually led authorities to investigate the entire operation of Archer home. What followed was a detailed examination of years of records and events. Investigators reviewed deaths connected to the institution, examined financial documents, questioned witnesses, and looked into Amy's purchases of arsenic. Pharmacy records reportedly showed that she had obtained more than 10 ounces of arsenic over time, explaining that it was intended for pest control. Investigators considered the quantity significant because it appeared excessive for ordinary use. The discovery became an important part of the prosecution's argument that Amy possessed access to the substance believed to have caused several suspicious deaths. The investigation reached its most significant stage when authorities began exhuming bodies. The dead residents of Archer home could no longer provide testimony, but forensic examination offered the possibility of answering questions that had remained unresolved. Franklin Andrews' remains revealed a significant amount of arsenic, supporting the argument that his death had not been caused by the stomach condition originally recorded. Michael Gilligan, Amy's second husband, was also examined after investigators became suspicious of the circumstances surrounding his death. His remains reportedly contained high levels of arsenic as well, although the interpretation of that evidence involved historical limitations and scientific questions. Additional examinations produced other suspicious findings, but not every case reached the same level of certainty required for criminal prosecution. These forensic discoveries helped shape the legal strategy that followed. Prosecutors understood that the existence of multiple suspicious deaths created a powerful context, but they also understood that a courtroom required specific proof. They could not ask a jury to convict Amy based solely on the possibility that she may have caused numerous deaths. They needed to prove one murder beyond reasonable doubt. Franklin Andrews became the center of that effort. In 1917, Amy Archer Gilligan faced trial for his death. The prosecution presented evidence connecting the major elements of the case: arsenic found in Andrews' remains, Amy's access to poison, financial benefits following deaths, and testimony regarding the unusual circumstances surrounding residents of Archer home. The defense challenged the interpretation of that evidence. They argued that elderly residents naturally faced serious health risks, that financial arrangements did not automatically indicate wrongdoing, and that no one had directly witnessed Amy poisoning Andrews. The jury ultimately accepted the prosecution's argument. Amy was found guilty of murdering Franklin R. Andrews and initially received a death sentence. However, after an appeal resulted in a new trial, the case took another turn. During the second proceeding, the defense emphasized questions regarding Amy's mental condition. The result was a conviction for second-degree murder, and the death sentence was replaced with life imprisonment. This outcome meant that Amy would not face execution, but it also ensured that she would spend the rest of her life under the consequences of her conviction. In 1924, Amy was declared mentally ill and transferred to a state psychiatric hospital in Connecticut. She remained there until her death in 1962 at approximately 93 years old. Her passing ended the life of a woman whose name had become permanently associated with one of the most infamous poisoning cases in American history. Yet her death did not eliminate the questions that surrounded Archer home. How many victims were there? Was Franklin Andrews the only person deliberately poisoned, or was he one of many? These questions remain part of the historical discussion. Investigators at the time suspected at least 5 victims. Some later studies suggested that the number could have been much higher, possibly reaching dozens of deaths. However, these larger estimates have never been proven in court. The confirmed legal record remains limited to the murder of Franklin Andrews. The importance of the Amy Archer Gilligan case extends beyond the question of victim numbers. The case demonstrated how difficult it can be to uncover crimes committed within relationships built on dependence and trust. It showed that harm can sometimes remain hidden when society assumes that certain environments are naturally safe. Nursing homes and caregiving institutions exist to protect people who are often unable to protect themselves, which makes accountability within those settings especially important. The investigation also contributed to broader awareness about the need for greater oversight of private care facilities. When residents are isolated, elderly, or physically vulnerable, systems must exist to ensure that their well-being is protected and that unusual patterns of illness or death are carefully examined. The legacy of Archer Home is therefore not only a story of crime, but also a reminder about responsibility. The residents who entered the facility were not merely names in investigative records. They were individuals who had lived full lives before their final years brought them to a place where they expected compassion. Their experiences represent the human cost behind the legal documents and historical debates. More than a century later, Amy Archer Gilligan remains remembered because her case combined several elements that continue to fascinate and disturb. A trusted caregiver, vulnerable victims, financial motives, poison hidden behind ordinary illness, and unanswered questions that survived long after the courtroom proceedings ended. The law delivered its judgment on one proven crime. History continues examining the larger story. At its center remains a simple but powerful lesson. Trust is one of the most valuable things a person can offer, and when that trust is betrayed, the consequences can echo for generations. The case of Amy Archer Gilligan did not end when the courtroom doors closed or when the final sentence was delivered. In many ways, the legal proceedings represented only one part of a much larger historical story. The conviction answered one question: whether Amy was responsible for the murder of Franklin R. Andrews. The jury determined that she was. But beyond that verdict remained a series of unanswered questions that continued to capture public attention for decades. The possibility that other residents of Archer Home had suffered similar fates transformed the case from a single criminal prosecution into a broader examination of trust, vulnerability, and the hidden dangers that can exist within institutions designed to provide care. The lasting significance of the case lies not only in what was proven, but also in what could never be fully established. For the residents who entered Archer Home, the decision to move into the facility was often a deeply personal one. Many elderly individuals at the beginning of the 20th century faced difficult circumstances. Medical care was far less advanced than it is today. Families were not always able to provide constant support, and many older adults found themselves without close relatives nearby. A private nursing home offered a solution to an increasingly common social challenge. It promised supervision, companionship, and assistance during a period of life when independence was becoming more difficult. The residents who came to Archer Home were not simply patients. They were people with personal histories, relationships, memories, and possessions accumulated over many years. Some had spent decades building families and communities. Others had experienced loss and loneliness. By the time they arrived at Archer home, many were seeking something more than medical assistance. They were looking for a place where they could feel secure. This emotional vulnerability became one of the most troubling aspects of the investigation. Prosecutors argued that Amy Archer Gilligan understood the position of trust she occupied. She was not accused of targeting strangers in public places. Instead, investigators believed she exploited relationships formed inside a home where residents depended on her every day. If the allegations were true, the crime was not only about financial gain or poisoning. It was also about the betrayal of individuals who had placed their final years in someone else's hands. The evidence presented during the investigation created a disturbing pattern. Residents entered Archer home and, in some cases, altered their financial arrangements. Amy became connected to their estates, insurance benefits, or property. Then, after unexpected deaths, she received financial advantages. Investigators believed this repeated connection between death and inheritance demonstrated a motive. Yet the complexity of the case came from the fact that every individual event had possible alternative explanations. A resident changing a will was not automatically suspicious. An elderly person leaving property to a caregiver could represent gratitude rather than manipulation. A death in a nursing home could occur naturally, especially among individuals already suffering from illness or advanced age. These realities made the investigation difficult because authorities were not simply examining obvious crimes. They were examining patterns hidden among events that could each appear ordinary when viewed separately. The breakthrough came because Franklin Andrews' family refused to accept uncertainty. Their questions forced authorities to look beyond official records and investigate whether the explanations surrounding Archer home were accurate. Without their persistence, the deaths connected to the institution might have remained isolated tragedies. Their actions demonstrated an important principle in criminal investigations. Sometimes a case begins not because authorities discover the truth first, but because ordinary people insist that something does not make sense. As investigators continued examining the evidence, the role of forensic science became central. The discovery of arsenic in Franklin Andrews' remains provided the foundation for the prosecution. At a time when many sudden illnesses were accepted as natural causes, scientific analysis offered a way to challenge previous conclusions. The investigation showed the importance of toxicology in understanding unexplained deaths, especially when symptoms resembled common illnesses. Arsenic was particularly significant because its effects could resemble severe digestive illness. Victims might experience abdominal pain, vomiting, diarrhea, and rapid physical decline. During an era when medical testing was limited, such symptoms could easily be attributed to natural disease. This made poisoning a particularly difficult crime to detect. The Amy Archer Gilligan investigation demonstrated how a deliberate act could remain hidden when it imitated the appearance of ordinary illness. The case also changed public perception regarding private elder care. Before the investigation, many families had limited ability to evaluate nursing homes or understand how residents were being managed. The discovery of suspicious deaths at Archer home highlighted the need for stronger oversight and greater attention to unusual patterns within care facilities. Although the case alone did not transform the entire healthcare system, it became part of a broader historical conversation about protecting vulnerable populations. The public fascination with Amy Archer Gilligan also came from the contrast between her appearance and the accusations against her. Many notorious criminals are remembered because of obvious violence or dramatic confrontations. Amy's case was different. The alleged crimes occurred quietly, within an environment associated with comfort and protection. Her reputation as a caring administrator made the accusations even more shocking because they challenged assumptions about who could commit serious crimes. Over time, Amy Archer Gilligan became one of the most recognizable examples of a female poisoner in American criminal history. stories about her often emphasize the possibility that she may have been responsible for numerous deaths. Some historical accounts suggested dozens of victims, while others focused more cautiously on the cases supported by available evidence. The difference between these interpretations reflects the central challenge of the case: separating historical suspicion from proven fact. The strongest evidence remains connected to Franklin Andrews. His death resulted in a conviction. His body contained evidence of arsenic. His financial relationship with Amy created a documented motive. His family's concerns initiated the investigation that exposed Archer Home. These facts established the legal foundation of the case. Other deaths remain part of the historical discussion but cannot be treated with the same certainty. The possibility that additional residents were victims continues to influence how Amy Archer Gilligan is remembered. But the exact number will likely never be known. Records from the period were incomplete, forensic methods were limited, and many deaths occurred before authorities had reason to investigate them. This uncertainty is one reason the case has remained fascinating for historians and true crime researchers. It represents the difficult space between what can be proven and what appears likely. A criminal investigation can establish facts, but history often must live with unanswered questions. In Amy Archer Gilligan's case, those questions remain connected to the lives of the residents who passed through Archer Home and the families who never received complete explanations. The story also inspired cultural discussions about the image of the seemingly harmless criminal. The contrast between a respectable elderly caregiver and allegations of murder contributed to the public's interest in the case. The events surrounding Archer Home were later associated with the famous play Arsenic and Old Lace, which drew inspiration from the broader concept of elderly women involved in arsenic-related crimes. Though the fictional story itself differed significantly from the actual events surrounding Amy Archer Gilligan. Ultimately, the enduring legacy of the case is not simply the story of one woman accused of poisoning others. It is a reminder of the importance of questioning assumptions, protecting those who are dependent on others, and recognizing that serious wrongdoing can sometimes exist behind familiar and trusted appearances. The residents of Archer Home entered the facility hoping for care during their final years. Their experiences became part of a case that changed how people viewed private caregiving and the responsibility society has toward its most vulnerable members. Amy Archer Gilligan lived for decades after her conviction, but the questions surrounding her remain. The court provided an answer to one crime. History continues to examine the possibility of many more. Between those two realities exists the lasting mystery of Archer Home, a place created to offer comfort, forever remembered because of the tragedy that unfolded within its walls.